get started. Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us here in your lunch break. We really appreciate it. My name's Anya Geddes. I work with the CIP team, and I also work with Dr. Sophie Scomps in Mackellar. I'm joining you from Garagal land and would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this beautiful country and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd like to thank you all for joining us again. Please put your burning questions in the chat. I know everybody on this panel has a lot of experience and would love to interact with you in the chat. We're lucky to have these people with us today, so definitely make use of it. We have some incredible, brave people on this panel who took the brave step of getting political in their own communities before the last election. And they all come from a range of locations. I'd like to welcome Delia Burridge from the Voices of Wentworth. Give us a wave, Delia. Greg Twitt from Ronan.
G'day.
Hi. Sue Frick from Kooyong. Marie Nutt from the Voices of Mackellar.
Hello.
Hi, Marie. And we're very excited to have Michael Roberts here from an exciting new group called the Voices of Tasmania. Hi, Michael. Just like community independents and their electorates, every Voices group is unique. It takes all different types of groups in different communities to get engaged and to get political. Today, we're going to focus on the evolution of Voices groups and how they've changed over time since Mary Crooks and the Victorian Women's Association first started them. The Victorian Women's Association themselves have been fundamental to starting the Together Yes campaign, which we were just talking about in an earlier session today, which is in itself an example of the way that the Voices model and the kitchen table model is evolving. In their new adaptation, they take the original model and they've organised for people to have actually 2 sessions and with a lot of information and even some homework in between. So that's a little bit different to the kitchen table model of old. One of the wonderful things about this panel is that it's a living representation of the evolution of the Voices model. No 2 Voices groups are the same, with each group reflecting the diversity of their community. So we're going to start by doing a quick rip around so that everybody can I've given everybody about 30 seconds to tell us where their group is located, what their core values are, when they began, and how many people it took to get started. So I'm going to throw to you first, Greg.
No worries. So I'm from Warrnambool in southwest Victoria, in the federal electorate of Wannon, which is quite a large regional electorate. So our core values for the Voices of Wannon are inclusive, transparent, accountable, respectful, and we behave with integrity. And we first started having a few informal conversations in November 2020, but formally sort of formed in January 2021. And at our first meeting, there were 10 of us.
Fantastic, 10 people. That's actually, I think, quite unusual to have quite that many people from the start, but let's hear from everybody else to find out. Marie, I'll throw to you next. Could you give us your where, what, when, and how?
Thanks, Anyo. So I'm here on Garagal land in the electorate of Mackellar, which is on Sydney's northern beaches. So if you've heard of Palm Beach and Home and Away, that's the northern end of our electorate. So our core values are respect, integrity, honesty, positivity, inclusivity, trust, and courage. We're about enabling community voices to be heard and counted, but encouraging the highest standard of representation of the community and political representation by our MP. So we officially incorporated as an association in New South Wales in August 2020. We had initially hoped to start a little bit earlier in the year, but COVID lockdowns got in the way of that. So we started our sort of socially distanced outside conversations on a beautiful sunny veranda in July of 2020 with 6 people.
Fantastic. Okay. Sue, I was going to throw to you. Sorry,
Yes.
just having a sip.
I'm good to go. So Voices of Kooyong started on Facebook, actually, and the COVID lockdowns was actually a really helpful aspect of us commencing because it was a really easy to gather like-minded people in a kind of low effort way using Facebook, social media, and a private group formed at the time. Our first meeting was at the Hawthorn Library in about 2021, earlier in that year, and there was actually about 20 of us when we got started. But we'd had a build-up from February when we sort of started in the online space through to sort of middle of the year when we were allowed out of home, I think in about April. So there was about 20 of us. We met at the library in Hawthorn. Voices of Kooyong became an incorporated association in around August of 2021. The core group from the original 20, the core group that kind of drove forward was about 6 of us. And our values around being inclusive and honest and respectful, and in particular, taking a very firm view about sort of a non-partisan approach, and to really be promoting and advocating for participation in our amazing democracy and not taking it for granted. And that was really the premise of VOC going forward. So it's still, interesting to see how all the groups are really different, but that's us.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Sue. Delia.
Hi, I'm Delia Burridge from Voices of Wentworth, which is in Sydney's eastern suburbs. We're all about improving democracy. We're a non-partisan group. Our values are integrity, equality, accountability, transparency, and respect. We improve democracy by listening to the community, providing people with information on the issues that they're concerned about. And where we have data to point to that shows that a majority of people support a particular position, then we advocate for change. Voices of Wentworth is the 3rd Voices group established in Australia after Indi and Warringah. Initially, it was just me and Kath Naish. I know Kath is on another session at this conference, getting started in early 2020. We grew to a committee of 6, plus a wider group of supporters. Then in 2021, Kath and another committee member, Eliana, decided that they wanted to join Allegra Spender's campaign. So being non-partisan, that wasn't really compatible with the two. So they went off to do that, and the remaining 4 members of the committee remained, which was me, Sophie, who's on the line, I think, Jenny and Alexia.
Fantastic, thank you. And actually, just before I introduce Michael, I can see Dennis Ginnivan is out there and Alana. I'm going to do my plug now at the beginning of, Delia mentioned Indi, who were, who are the godparents of this movement. And I see, oh, how lovely, quite a few people out there have their Indi Way books handy, so it's quite hard to do it with a background, but I hope you can see it. The Indi Way book has recently come out with beautiful and amazing stories, and also they've been having book launches all around the country, and I know that the Sydney one is coming up very soon in a few weeks, and I'll be there, so I hope I see some of you in person if you're in Sydney. So that's my plug for the Indi Way. Thanks, Dennis. Whoops. Okay, now Michael, let's hear about our wonderful new group.
Thanks, Anya. Thanks, everyone. It's, I feel like I'm in really esteemed company here with all these established and very successful groups. We're a little bit different in that we're across all 5 of Tasmanian electorates, and the federal and state electorates actually overlap, which is very different than what happens on the mainland. They're completely overlapped. And so we figured Tasmania is kind of small enough to maybe let's see if we can start a group that actually supports the whole of the state. So it's an experiment. We actually began in local government, but before I go there, our core values are politically, we value accountability, integrity, and transparency. Behaviourally, we value respect, cooperation, and fairness. Socially, we value equality, human rights, mutual prosperity, and participation. And environmentally, we value biodiversity, conservation, and regeneration. So we did a lot of background work to get our charter clear. It started out as like a 10-page document with an early group. And that early group didn't then sort of go on and become the Voices of Tasmania core group, but they did a great job. And then we whittled it back from 10 to 1 page. But we actually started Dennis, and a shout out to Dennis, who's just a stalwart of this entire movement, as it seems to me. to support us with kitchen table conversations in a local government area. And where there were 3 of us, and one ran and one in that area. And that was kind of like an experiment of how this might work. We incorporated in August 2022. So we began in 2020 with local government, but we really incorporated in August 2022 once we had a Voices of Tasmania core group. That we had 3 rounds of trying to get this thing started, and it just kept not forming. So persistence is a virtue. It's certainly mine in any of these fields. And so we started with 4 in the Voices of Tasmania as it is today, but we actually began with Voices for Tasmania because there was already another Voices of group. So we've only just come out of the wilderness, out in publicly, because we had another Voices group that we didn't want to tread on their toes, but they weren't very active. So it was like this, how do we get this together? That took a long time. Well, we just gone public.
Yep, that is so good that you mentioned that, because I think that has happened in many areas where, and if there's anyone out there starting a new group where there might be other groups that you discover along the way, reach out to them and as Michael's done, go through the process of listening and meeting and working together as well as you can. Michael, you've mentioned that it's different down in Tasmania. Now, what we'd love to do is ask you to share the opportunity that is just too good to miss in Tasmania right now.
Yeah, Tassie's often left off the Australian maps for various reasons, and we get a bit sore about that kind of thing. We're a tiny little place, but when we have a very different electoral system, we have the Hare-Clark system, which is in the ACT as well, which means we have multi-member electorates. So for the last 20-something years, we've had 5 members per electorate. So we've got 5 electorates, 5 members, that's 25 in the lower house. And that's been for this 20 years because 23 years ago or so, the government tried to eliminate the opposition of the Greens, who were on the rise with 5 seats and getting excited about government. And so they reduced it from 35, which is how we federated when we first set up as a state, back to 25. And now the current Liberal government has been brave enough to say, we'll expand it back to 35. So the next election has 10 empty seats. There's no incumbents in them. So we see this with the wave of community independence across Australia. It's a massive opportunity for us to be able to assist Tasmania to really become, put some really great leaders in those empty seats. So yeah, we're already in a minority. We expect a bigger minority. All of the trends across Australia are the same here.
Fantastic. Can't wait to see it play out. We'll all be watching.
Thanks.
So most of your groups incorporated at some point along the journey. So if people out there who are starting new groups, please reach out to the CIP and have a look on our website and toolkit, because there's lots of stuff to learn about the governance that goes behind running a Voices group. But everybody emerged with different versions. I'm going to bring Sue back into the conversation now. Originally, your group started loosely together, similar to in a sort of an iteration of what Mark Kelly started in Warringah with Vote Tony Out, but then you changed along the way. So do you want to share your story of how your group changed over time?
Yeah, it was a really interesting journey. In Kooyong, the Facebook group where we kind of all came together was a Vote Josh Out kind of mindset, which was very exciting in the beginning, and it was like a very purposeful way of just sort of getting people kind of coalescing together behind a common purpose. But as we journeyed through the months of February, March, April, we had the first meeting together. It became obvious that actually it's a somewhat short-sighted end goal. So having voted Josh out, is that actually what we wanted to do? What we really felt that we wanted to do was to actually promote grassroots participation in democracy and to really focus on representation and to be there for the long haul. So really what we were actually being and acting like as we were going through the journey, we were acting like a Voices of group. And so then it became very obvious that in order to be sustainable, but to achieve the goals that we were setting out for ourselves, as a group, it became evident that we actually needed to change. So Vote Josh Out lived as like a brand and had its own kind of Twitter site, and it was still a very interesting and like run by a different person to Voices of Kooyong. But from those early stages, though, that actually gave us a lot of impetus, and why we had so many people showing up to the very first meeting was because there was that, you know, common area of concern. And also, you know, for Kooyong, the very real possibility that as we went through the process of engaging and connecting with the community, it was evident that the community really wanted an independent candidate. And it was obvious to us in Voices of Kooyong that that wasn't our job to find a candidate. So because we wanted to be there promoting democracy, representation, making every voice count, and so our purpose became more firmly established, our values more clearly articulated, and the ability to sort of stand beyond the election cycle was sort of born out of that clarity that we had. Yeah. Fantastic.
So interesting. And you mentioned that you decided you wouldn't be choosing a candidate, which again is very, you know, one of those differences that we see in different voices groups, you know, different to the Indi way as well. Delia, you also had the same approach, which you describe as non-partisan. That's the terminology that you used to indicate that you weren't going to be choosing a candidate or running an independent campaign.
Yeah, that's right. Not only not choosing a candidate, but also not endorsing a candidate.
Yeah.
So we did that for many reasons. Three of the main reasons were reach, supporter demand, and access to subject matter experts. So in our electorate, we felt that the best way to contribute to improving democracy was to engage as many constituents as possible from all parts of the political spectrum. And to listen to the broad range of people within the electorate, regardless of who they were voting for, and listen to their concerns, and to keep them involved in public policy discussions long after the election. Like, we were very keen to have a life beyond the electoral cycle. We were very much focused on public policy and voter education so that people were able to make informed decisions at the ballot box. And that's a mission that runs all the time between elections. This belief in remaining non-partisan was validated by the feedback we received from our supporters. A number of active volunteers told us that they only supported our activities because we were non-partisan. Obviously, when Allegra stepped up to run, which was, you know, relatively late in the piece compared to some of the candidates, and her campaign got started, there were many of our supporters who donned a teal t-shirt in addition to their orange and white Voices of Wentworth t-shirt, which was totally as we expected. But equally, there were others who weren't comfortable making that change, or who who wanted to continue to be involved in our work. Another reason for our non-partisan approach was that a key part of our activities involves running town hall discussions and interviews with subject matter experts to talk about major federal policy areas. Many of those SMEs are working for either not-for-profits or charities that have a requirement that their employees are only involved in non-partisan activities, or similarly come from corporate environments where they have those sort of internal policies where they can only come on to panels like that with a non-partisan group. So in order for us to really get people who were creating policy, who were leading to, involved in think tanks that were informing the public debate and were really experts in what they were talking about, so that people in our electorate were able to speak directly to them, hear from them, disintermediated from the media's opinion of them. We felt that, you know, being non-partisan was the only way to go to fulfill that brief. So yeah, it was important to us.
Makes sense. And I was actually, I have to admit, I was part of the conversation, the six-week sort of vigorous conversation that happened with the Voices of Michaela. Dennis also came in to arbitrate at one point in making those big decisions that Sue and Delia have just been talking about when I was originally a part of the Voices of Michaela myself. So Marie, would you like to share with us some of the positive experiences and challenges that Voices of Michaela have experienced as a non-partisan group?
Thanks, Anya. Yes, they were vigorous discussions that we had in those early days. because it was very clear that when we set up that we weren't going to be looking for a candidate, that there wasn't already an MP in place who had 18 months of his term left. And it was felt that we needed to be a voice for all people across all political views and bring their concerns to that MP and try and have a constructive discussion with him. So that's what being nonpartisan can do in a positive way, and I think that's a real strength of it. Being nonpartisan, so let me talk about the challenge in a moment, but the other thing to know is that, as well as Anyo, Sophie Scomps was also a member of our founding committee. And we had those sort of nonpartisan values at the very beginning. But it was very clear that other people were on a different journey to those in the committee that wanted to maintain the nonpartisan role. But the important thing about being nonpartisan now is, with Sophie Scomps as our MP, is that, we've gone from a safe Liberal seat to a marginal seat. And the significance of that marginal position is that there are 47% of the Mackellar electorate who did not make Sophie their first or their second choice when they voted. So how do we help have their voices heard, and how do we help them be included? So we felt that was really important for us to maintain that nonpartisan role. Also, you've got to remember that we still can have a role with those state and local representatives across a range of parties. Really interesting to hear about things in Tasmania. I had no idea how the political system works down there. But when we were having those vigorous debates that Anyo discussed, mentioned in those early weeks and months, it was really appropriate that the members of our founding committee stepped out to search for that candidate or campaign for that candidate. At that particular time, it was totally appropriate for them to do that. The challenge then was, even though our communications and our activities remained non-partisan throughout that 18 months to the election, unfortunately, we were viewed unfairly and sceptically by our MP, and our dialogue then became quite fraught with him. So his perception of us being non-partisan meant, well, he thought we weren't non-partisan, so that made our dialogue with him difficult. So that's something to consider. The other thing is that, now we have an MP who's very good at engaging with constituents, who's providing a lot of opportunities for them to meet with her, go to events, have pop-ups in the community, which is fantastic. And one of our jobs is to promote those in the community so that our community can engage with their democracy. But because there are so many of these opportunities, if we promoted every one of them and you went to our social media feed, it would look like we were being a mouthpiece for our MP. So we temper that a little bit. We put some of the key ones in and we leave our MP to do the rest. So it's a little bit of a balancing act and a fine line that we walk sometimes.
Well, thank you, Marie. That's fantastic. Really, really helpful, I think, to everybody out there to hear about the different ways we're interacting. Greg, I'm going to come to you next. Everybody has mentioned that one of their core goals is to increase democratic participation in their communities. How important were KTCs and a listening process for you in Wannon?
Yeah, really important. I think the whole kitchen table conversation thing is vital. I know that the Mackellar, Wentworth and Kooyong have done a lot of these too, but for us in Wannon, I mean, obviously they're a way to kind of find out the views of people in Wannon, but they are more than that. It was really important spot for people to actually be able to sit down and just have their say and be heard. In a way that wasn't judgmental, or it wasn't, debating the issues. It's just what do you really think? What's important to you? And we did have a lot of people sort of feeding back, people that had been in a kitchen table conversation saying that they found that really quite empowering, that it was important that they felt like their values were listened to. So that was really important. Obviously, they were also a really good way to get more people involved in Voices of Wannon, just by growing that supporter base. And out of it, we did establish what our community priorities were, and we managed to get a report together. It's a bit hard.
It's hard to
get a report together with what the priorities people thought out of that. And that was really key, because having that document we could always refer back to. We were hoping to talk to our local MP, who's Liberal MP, and we did have a meeting all booked up, ready to go. Unfortunately, he cancelled at the last minute and then started making disparaging remarks about us in the media. So I think similar to what Marie was alluding to in Mackellar. And at that point, a lot of the members of Voices of Wannon said, well, hey, we really think we need to get an independent. So we actually did conduct kind of the selection process, I guess, and endorse Alex Dyson as our independent candidate. From that point, Voices of Wannon as an entity didn't run anything to do with a campaign or anything like that. We pretty much went into the background. Of course, a lot of us did then individually go and join the Voices, the Dyson for Wannon campaign, but as a sort of a separate thing. Some of the challenges, though, it was difficult with the physical, like, geography of Wannon. It's we're quite a big electorate, and it's hard to get, it's sort of 4-hour drive from one side to the other. And so that made it hard for Voices of Wannon to get as much reach as we wanted. But, and then of course, COVID happening as well. But, we got there.
Well done. That's fantastic. What a great story. And I'm just noticing in the chat, and I hope everyone can pile in there, that there's a wonderful person saying that her husband, James, and herself would love to gather members together and create a Voices of Deacon group. So we have a new voices group sort of just starting here in this chat, in this session. So that's fantastic. If people could get into the chat and give them lots of encouragement to go forth and conquer, and keep in touch with us as well at the CIP, and we'll try to connect you with all the people that we know who might be in your area. Obviously, you've had a bit of political activity down there that has a few people have come out of the woodwork, which is great lately. So please, that's fantastic. Okay, great. That's good to hear. Now, Delia, we were just talking a bit about KTCs, and your group is in an urban area, and you took quite a different approach to sort of having sort of 6 to 10 people around a table by hosting large scale KTCs. Do you want to tell us about a different way of doing it?
Yeah, look, I would agree with the comment that KTCs are really important, because for a huge variety of reasons, which you can read about in all of the publications that have been put out of Indi, which is where we got the inspiration, obviously. When we started doing them in people's homes, we found that we were having great conversations with people, but we weren't able to get that exponential growth that the Indi KTCs got, where they were able to, find somebody who participated and train them up to be the next host. We didn't get a lot of offers for hosts. So instead, what we did is we experimented with running a larger group of KTCs all at once in a pub, which we advertised as Voices in the Pub. We were lucky enough to get a local pub that would let us use a private room, which was really important because it became quite a rowdy experience. And we did put a bit of sort of showmanship into it as well, so that, we had a wheel of concerns that was like a game show, where we had different topics that we knew from earlier KTCs that people were concerned about, and we tried to make it as kind of fun and participatory as possible. The core of it, though, was we had 9 tables of around 8 participants, each with 2 trained volunteers acting as a facilitator and a scribe in the usual KTC way. The key difference was that we were all doing it in the one place at the one time. And it really did create quite a festival atmosphere. And there were none of those sort of awkward silences because there was so much other chatter going on. And it almost, I dare to say, almost became slightly competitive of who was going to have exciting conversation on a table, because we could hear, you know, all this raucous activity on the table next to us. That worked really well, and we planned to do more of those because we really wanted to get the depth of data, and particularly we wanted to run one of those sessions further north in the electorate. So anyone who's familiar with Sydney would be familiar with the eastern suburbs, and further north you go into Vaucluse, you have a different demographic than is down in Bondi, and we wanted to be able to reach as many people as possible. So we were keen to try it in the north, but then we went into lockdown. So we morphed what we were doing to Voices from the Couch, which was a single KTC session run over Zoom, which might actually be something that those electorates that are very geographically spread out might consider, because they do work. You've got to have quite a bit of enthusiasm in your facilitator to try and keep everybody engaged and to monitor who needs to come in and have a say. But they, you know, they're not as good as doing it live, but they do work. And it was a way of continuing the conversation for that period of time, which for the Melburnians was very long, but for us was long enough that we were in lockdown. So, and we were still collecting data, which to put into our report, which was, you know, a key deliverable for our group, because it opened all sorts of doors with talking to decision makers. It proved an accessible option as well for people who were less mobile. So that was actually a win for some people. And even after lockdown finished, we found that because a lot of participants tended to be an older demographic, there was some concern in the community about getting together for live events anyway. So even while we were still running some live outdoor events, we were still running the Voices from the Couch online so that we could keep those discussions going. We supplemented that activity with a number of other participatory and data collection activities, such as democracy walks on Bondi Beach, which were a lot of fun, getting everybody out in their T-shirts, you know, just going up to people. It was, you know, really good training ground for volunteers as well, in being able to just talk to strangers. Trying to find locals on Bondi Beach was our biggest challenge. But it was still good training in just approaching people, and it was a very positive experience for people. We also continued to do what we called quick polls, which was a poll that was a single yes/no question open for a 24-hour period, which we posted to a whole lot of social media groups that were in the community outside of being branded Voices. And got some really great data out of that. So sometimes getting 500 responses overnight to a single question. An example of that would be, you know, should we move Australia Day to a different date? 98% said yes. We had longer form surveys using the kitchen table conversation standard questions. And we did letterboxing with QR codes to get those surveys out into the community. Whenever we held a live event, we also had attendees use a piece of paper with a quote bubble on it with our branding and write down what they wanted to see by 2030, which could be anything. So, you know, it was really kind of outcome focused policy questions. And those were great because we could photograph the person holding them, put them on social media. There's a collection of them in our Wentworth Cares report. Adds a bit of colour and human, you know, that we're there in amongst the people, trying to talk to the people. And also added data to our data set. So yes, a lot of things, not just traditional KTCs.
Oh, it's fantastic, and what an amazing amount of work for a small team, and your amazing volunteers. Now, I'm just going to go off script again for a minute to say that we also have another fantastic new group, Voices of Farah. So round of applause for Voices of Farah. Thanks for getting started. It's very exciting. And hopefully you'll connect with more people at this convention and beyond. We also have Voices of Gold Coast, another new group starting, and they put a call out here into the chat for more people to come, you know, anyone who lives up in the Gold Coast to join. Oh, you are, Fadden? Okay, and then Farah and Fadden, and also McEwen, somebody who's just dipping the toe in and thinking I might start a group in McEwen, or I'd like to connect with like-minded people. So what I will say is, for everybody else here on the chat, we all have sort of friends and relatives that live outside of, I hope, outside of our own neighborhoods. And so if you do know people up in these around these different areas around the country, please do encourage your cousins, your friends, your old schoolmates who have moved away to look for their local voices groups and join these wonderful people who are just starting out in their areas. And apologies if I've missed, Voices of the Top End. Yes. Larrakia. Oh, what fantastic. Oh, welcome, Northern Territory. It's so good to have you on the call. Oh, sorry, on the Zoom. We're so happy to have you, and we can't wait to see what you do and support you in everything as you grow. All right, so going back to the script, where we were heading a minute ago. Thank you, Delia. So both Greg and Delia have talked about sort of the difficulty in sometimes, getting that first flow, getting those first few people coming to KTCs and building the momentum. But Sue, on the other hand, has had a complete opposite experience where, you were quite overwhelmed from the very start. So what was that experience like in a small team, having to resource that? Can you tell us what the numbers were like and what happened in Kooyong?
Yeah, I think look, we have to acknowledge and probably thank the fact that we had the Federal Treasurer as our current sitting MP, who had, unfortunately, for a lot of the people that became involved in Voices of Kooyong, proven himself to not be particularly interested in genuinely representing the changing perspectives of the Kooyong constituency. And so our social media activity, because we'd started up and we were reasonably active on Twitter, we had about 9,000 followers happen like almost within, I don't know, it was like maybe 3 weeks. We went from 0 to 9,000 nearly followers. Now, what does that mean? That means there was a weight of expectation on us. The followers that were conversing with us in our kind of social sphere were from across Australia. They weren't just Kooyong residents, although there were plenty of those there as well. For us, I can't overstate the importance of having somebody in the team with good skills in managing the socials. For us, that was absolutely vital. It also meant for us as a small team, we had to be really thoughtful about providing kind of ongoing engagement, both soft touch and kind of more deliberate. So like the other Voices of groups we've heard about, we also did kitchen tables, we letterbox dropped. We had fantastic T-shirts made. We had a democracy walk. We actually looked to not just Indi, but Wentworth, who were doing such great things in this sphere of like promoting participation in our democracy. But we needed to kind of be almost a bit like a metronome and do something on the regular and continue to communicate on a basis of both the socials with newsletters out to our mailing list. We did events. We had a fantastic event with Julia Banks. We had an amazing event on climate with climate experts. We had, at the time, the urgency from the community started to build around finding a candidate. The event that was kind of our crossover event was a fantastic discussion with Kerry O'Brien and facilitated by Simon Holmes, a court, and Katie McGowan about just the role of community, the role of media, and just our democracy in general, which was held at the Kew High School Hall. And that was like hundreds of people bought tickets to that event. And so for us, the pressure of having like a huge growth and a lot of profile was that we needed to be like pretty on it in terms of the regular with the communication. So I think starting small has the benefit of not overwhelming small groups of people who are starting this up. And I think, on reflection, and this is probably true of nearly every volunteer organisation, there's a core group of stalwarts who are probably over-indexed in terms of the time that they're spending to keep things moving. And it's like comes down to maybe 4 people or 5 people just continuing to do the hard yards. And I think everyone should go into that with their eyes wide open. And if you have fast growth, as we had in Kooyong, it is quite a bit of work. Having said that, it's incredibly good fun. And the skills, right? So the skills that you learn about like how you get your messaging right and how you can create the sense of community, even when most of our stuff was happening during lockdown. Just the benefit of having a t-shirt to wear around is a pretty cool thing when you go to the shops. So I think there are definitely things that you can do with a small group of people that gives you the impression of being much larger and like a huge team. But if you can find someone who can help you manage your Twitter, your Instagram, and your Facebook as a core attribute of the community building right from the get-go, I think that's absolutely vital. And I hope you get 9,000 people overnight. I mean, that's pretty cool, right? It's a good problem to have.
Good problem to have, yeah.
But it does require you to be pretty on it, I think. One of the things I know this is a little bit off the topic, but it's as I'm hearing all of these groups kind of emerging, I think one of the things that we learned through this process is like the earlier you can kind of nail your purpose and your core principles, the earlier you can kind of nail that down and genuinely start to think about not finding a candidate as the first order of business, but actually finding your community as your first order of business. It is like, that's the game changer because the candidate will emerge, but the community building is actually what gives you your heart and your soul, and it's the thing that people most love. And even if you're geographically dispersed, it's using your socials wisely is a way of connecting people together and actually reminding them about what it feels like to be part of a community and to talk about things that matter to us all. So I think if there's one thing I can say to all the new groups that are popping up is like really focus on that community building aspect. And that's the nugget of gold, I think, in all of us being able to live past a federal election cycle. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I will say for everyone out there that it can sound quite overwhelming if you haven't sort of used social media much before, or if you haven't put on an event before with quite a high profile person. But my experience, and I'm sure everybody on the panel will agree, is that one of the most incredible things about the community independence movement is the generosity. So the generosity of time and sharing and knowledge in everybody who is in this movement, whether it's somebody who can share their experience of having their first conversation handing out a flyer on an election booth, or whether it's experts out there who are prepared to give their time to be on your panel in your town, in your town hall. Don't doubt the strength of this movement and the amount of people who are out there. Reach out, ask the questions, do the networking. If you're thinking I'm going to have my first event, reach out to people everywhere. There's a beautiful group that Dennis and Phil run, the Voices of Australia, who is incredibly generous in their time in supporting new groups starting and sharing all of their incredible knowledge. There are lots of groups out there, and so many people really want to pay it forward. And as most of you have said on this panel, it's a lot of work, but it's so fulfilling and so much fun that it's actually just something that I can see everybody nodding, which is nice. It's something that people really do want to share with other people and share that inspiration and feel like other people are going to be having that wonderful experience themselves out there. So we're just going to sort of do another whip around to give everybody an opportunity to talk about. We've sort of talked about how we all got here, how these voices were groups were formed, how they worked before the last election. But I'm sure what everybody wants to hear is also what's going to happen now. So we'll go around the group and talk about what you're all planning for the next year in this non-election period and the role of your voices groups now. So we might start with Greg.
unmute myself, of course. Voices of Wannon is trying to do a few things. So we're encouraging our members to write letters to the editor, things like that, to keep our profile out there. We're preparing some information about for secondary schools, hoping to get into some secondary schools and run some things around democracy. We have got some information on a website about the Voice to Parliament, hoping people will educate themselves on that. And we're just starting another round of kitchen table conversations. So we're hoping to run a whole stack of kitchen table conversations this year and prepare another report from that by the end of the year.
Fantastic. Who would like to go next? Marie?
Thanks, Anyo. So I'll tell a little bit of a story behind one of our next events, which will be a Q&A with Sophie Scomps, our MP, before the end of the year. We're in very early days of organising. We did a Q&A with her in February, which was branded as 200 days in office, because that was the time frame. And how that came about was quite interesting, because when we first sat down with her after the election, what we wanted to talk about was the report, which was a culmination of the kitchen table conversation findings. And she'd already been in office several months by then. And when she looked at the top 20 issues and concerns, she was able to highlight the things that she'd already done. So that took us to a 6-month McKellar MP report card that we produced. And so when we shared what she had done over those first 6 months on those top 20 issues concerns, we wanted to then reach the audience in McKellar in a different way. So we held our first Q&A, which I hope Mark will be able to put up a link to an article. We held that in February. So we're going to do another Q&A with Sophie and have a Q&A series, not always with our MP, but sometimes perhaps we'll do them on key issues. We're also going to be doing some education on the upcoming referendum. And Greg, I've had a look at that Voice to Parliament page on your website, and I think it's really great. Thank you. So we might borrow a little bit of that for ourselves.
Feel free.
We haven't made a commitment yet to doing more community consultation through the KTC process, but we know how valuable that is. We know how valuable it is to have a report that we can then give to all the candidates before the next election. So we will look at that. We haven't actually made a formal decision on that, but we also know from our past experience that when the election is called within the next 18 months, 2 years, that we have a great role as a non-partisan organisation to put together a candidate forum, which is what we did before the last election, and brought all the candidates together. And that's another good opportunity for people to engage with them and get more informed in the lead up to the election. So a few things in the short term, and then looking at the future and some of the things that we're currently considering.
Very good. Thank you, Marie. That's fantastic. And I think we'll go to Tasmania now, to Michael.
Thanks, Anyo. Yeah, we've distilled down the classic voices approach to collect the voices. So where I've got, and then connect them with connect the communities with great candidates, and then campaign on behalf of what the voices said. So not campaign for the candidates, campaign for the voices that you've collected. So we've put the word out to Tasmanians. We are putting it out to Tasmanians. We want 1,000 voices in each of the 5 electorates. So we'll have a state report and a per electorate report that will then go to everybody who's a candidate or representative. And then we'll be supporting local communities to run almost like it's not quite a template, but a suggested approach to connecting with great candidates. And that's having to go in parallel, because we're now in minority government, and the government could fall at any time. We're not due for another 24 months, but we just don't know. So we're having to sort of play this, like we've only just really got formed very well and really getting some traction, but we're looking for volunteers to come on board and to be active in the volunteer space, because it's going like quickly. We're going to have the Kooyong problem, you know, as we go, and then we want people to be jumping into roles and trying it out and getting support and coaching as we head towards whenever this next election is going to be. So we're sort of doing the whole ladder thing in as rapidly, which is community engagement on one side and candidate connection on the other.
Excellent. Looking forward to watching that play out as well.
Yeah,
we'll be watching very closely. Sue, what's your plan for Kooyong over the next year?
Look, at the end of last year, after the federal election, we took a survey amongst the membership of Voices of Kooyong to find out what they wanted to see coming next. They were keen for us to continue to be nonpartisan, of course. They were very keen for us to think broadly about how we can support issues at every level of the government. So local council issues in the councils in the Kooyong space, state government and federal government. To that end, we're planning the world's biggest kitchen table conversation to happen in Kooyong. We're looking to host a mega event, World Cafe style, similar to the one that Delia spoke about.
Right.
We're also preparing a longitudinal study, so something that will start to collect data from residents of Kooyong over the long term. So we're working on the right kinds of questions that would allow us to collect really high quality data over a long period of time, so that we can track issues and trends in the importance of issues over time amongst the electorate. That's going to take a bit of work, but we've got some great brains helping us with that. We're also really keen to commence working on a system or a process to help educate the community, starting with new voters, but stretching further than that about our preferential voting system, because it turns out nearly everyone doesn't know how preferential voting works. So
yeah, there's so much civic education to do.
Yep. And it's like one of the most important parts of our, like, why our democracy is so great, having this preferential voting is actually a key component of that, but it's alarming how many people don't understand it. And so that's what our agenda is, because like the other guests today, we realise that having the voices of compiled in a report that can be shared with any candidate who seeks to represent Kooyong is a vital part of amplifying the voices of the community.
Excellent. So good. Thank you. Now, Delia.
Yes, so because we've always been separate to the MP, we're really just continuing business as usual on our mission of listening, informing and advocating. It's just now that we have an independent MP who really wants to engage with the community and is very, very active in doing so, then our job is a lot easier. So we have a line of communication with her team and her community engagement manager, and we're able to provide feedback on the information we're getting on people's policy preferences and policy issues from subject matter experts through that regular contact. We've also been engaging with state members and council members, and that's really one of the important things about having a report, because you can demonstrate that you have gone out there and done the hard work to speak to the community and that you do actually understand what people are concerned about. So it's a real door opener when you want to speak to people at all levels of government. We've been maintaining our social media presence and our brief of informing people. We have taken a bit of a break from doing the town halls. They are do take a lot of effort, time and energy to run. And I think that the core group of people who were on our committee were probably a bit exhausted and needed to regroup, because we were, some Voices groups kind of stepped aside in favour of the campaign group in the lead up to the election. Because we're nonpartisan, we obviously didn't do that. We were extremely busy in the lead up to the election, running candidate forums, doing candidate questionnaires. There was just so much activity. So it is true that our we did scale down our ambitions for a while, But we believe it's extremely important that we start collecting good quality data again for preparing a report in the future. It is core to what we do. So we'll be doing kitchen table conversations of one kind or another, building on what we've done in the past, and offering information on the voice. As Allegra said earlier today, you know, she's running, well, she set up and has allowed volunteers to run Wentworth for the Voice. So there's already a lot of activity happening in that space. Our position on that is that we're there to provide more civics education on how a referendum runs, so that people understand the process more, rather than moving on more of the you know, getting community leaders to talk to, you know, as in Indigenous community leaders to talk to the local community. We're probably going to be doing more of the technical educational piece on how a referendum works.
Makes sense. That's great. Thank you. We've had a question actually, Delia, a little while back. I think when you were talking about all the different forums that you use to engage with the community, Voices of Dixon asked how many responses did you get in Wentworth using all of those different forums? So I think probably when you were talking about doing the, you know, in the pub and then on the couch and
the numbers are in the
polls,
so the numbers are in the report. When it came to data, and I was interested to hear from Sue about what's going on in Kooyong in terms of having experts to really set up some integrity around future data collection. That's fantastic. We found that we were not as ambitious as that with our report. We basically have set out in the report the more anecdotal data, as in what were people saying at kitchen table conversations, what were the most frequently raised topics. And then we had I think, I'm trying to remember how much it was, and I don't want to get the number completely wrong, but I think on the survey we had maybe 800 responses, or it might have been more than that. It's been a while since I looked at that, but it is set out in the report. I know in some electorates, particularly in Indi, they were able to run hundreds of KTCs, which is amazing and was a core part of what Voices of Indi was doing. I'm like an advocate for Voices of Indi today, I don't know why. We certainly
all are.
We certainly didn't host as many as that, because to do that, you really have to get the viral growth of having, you know, train the trainer and people going off and you know, pretty much everyone that you host, you need to get somebody from that group to then go and run one themselves, and that's how it grows exponentially. But certainly with the quick polls, we were getting you know, up to between 300 and 500 responses over, you know, within a 24-hour period on those. So
can I just jump in here? So like these numbers are really impressive, Delia. In Wannon, we really didn't get that much traction, but I'm just wanting to put it out there to people who are starting this sort of process with smaller groups or building their groups. Even though we only had, I think it was 22 kitchen table conversations in the end, it's a tiny fraction of the sort of proportion of Wannon voters. It was still really valuable, and it's still, you know, it achieved our end goal. We would have loved to have done hundreds, but it was still really good. So don't be scared.
Yeah, and every one of those becomes an advocate. Like, you know, you are not only hosting a kitchen table conversation to hear their views, you are also you're introducing people to the concept of participatory democracy. And each one of those people, they're not going to be silent about that experience. They're going to go out and talk to other people, and those people might participate in the KTC, or they might participate in some other way. But they're really important, even if the numbers are low. I agree with Greg.
Really good point. And so please put any I see Louise Harrison is saying that's very reassuring, Greg. So please put any other questions in the chat. We're just about at time, but we can extend a little bit. We've got about 15 minutes until Alana Johnson's amazing session with Kate Gunn from the Liverpool Plains and Jackie Scrooby about PEP 11 and Susie Pearce about the North East Rail. So these are communities that have taken on issue and galvanized their community behind an issue, which is another, different way of getting that community engaged. Does anybody want to put, if you want to put some questions in the chat, otherwise I might ask Leah, would you like to turn your microphone on and tell us a bit about how you're going up in Gold Coast? I'm putting you on the spot here. You can shake your head if you're not up for it.
You are putting me on the spot.
I am.
And we also have Chris here, who is also
Hi,
Voices
Chris.
of Gold Coast. And Chris started it actually a couple of years ago. So if Chris wants to say something there about that. And I've come along connected with him because I'm in a further south seat to him in McPherson. And we're really still embryonic, I suppose, in that we're still forming our core group and finding out, really trying to understand our values and what that is. And people do get sidetracked by, we want to also find the candidate, and then we come back to about, we've got to build our core group.
Fantastic. Oh, sorry, keep going.
I don't know if Chris wants to say something about Voices for Gold Coast.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about
Hi, Chris.
in respect that the Gold Coast often is seen as one region, but it actually has 5 electorates in it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
my thinking is that you want to have a coordinated approach when it comes to running campaigns for independence and also raising the awareness on voting matters and how people can participate in democracy. So Voices for GC is like a head organisation that then coordinates with other groups. So for the by-election that's happening in Fadden on the 15th of July, there's a group called We Are Fadden. So that was established by Voices for GC in order to run a campaign based on that by-election, in order to run surveys, kitchen table conversations. And the way that it's set up is that you want to make sure that you maximize the exposure of the various campaigns, because a lot of the media is Gold Coast based. It's not based on a particular electorate. So in order to get that interest from those and from others from outside of the Gold Coast, that's where we saw that there was a great advantage of setting up a group to cover those 5 electorates within the Gold Coast.
That's really interesting. And that's a really great example of another evolution, a different way of doing it, where you have that umbrella group for the whole Gold Coast area and the 5 electorates, similar to, in a way, to what Tasmania are doing. And now we have a question from Louise Harrison about funding, and if key Voices volunteers are also working other jobs or full-time volunteers. Okay, I think we can definitely easily answer that question. Panel, were you working or were you a full-time volunteer?
Full-time worker, full-time volunteer.
Exactly. Would anyone else like to share?
Yeah, and just on the fundraising, it's important to kind of make this super clear to people who are joining your group. Setting yourself up as a proper not-for-profit has an enormous amount of reasonably complex governance associated with it. So we chose not to do that. And we would use GoFundMes from time to time to call out for donations, which was great. So we had a youth event one time. We put a call out with a GoFundMe and promoted it on our socials. Another reason why having a social presence is super important. And we were able to raise enough money to allow a group of young people to get together and talk about what was important to them, and pay for someone to spin some records and put some beer at the bar for them, and it was a really lovely activity for them to do. But we just raised that through promoting it on the socials. So people are very generous, and I think if you're clear about what you're asking the money for, you'll get donations to help you with your operating costs. Things like paying for Nation Builder, paying for like events, et cetera, and be forthcoming. I think you need to kind of put it out there that you need money.
The question out there.
Yeah.
Can I join in too? So good question, Louise. Yeah, it is really hard. It's hard because we're all busy and, you know, a few of us in Voices of Indi are still full-time workers. Some also sort of semi-retired. So some of those people had a little bit more time, but you can't always rely on people who are sort of retired to spend hours and hours on things. In terms of fundraising, Voices of Indi was really lean. We didn't really fundraise much apart from a small membership fee and a little bit of fundraising just to publish a report and do a little bit of media around that. But then election campaigns totally different. That was another kettle of fish.
That's totally, absolutely different. And Marie, Voices of Michaela also didn't do a great deal of fundraising. Do you want to talk about both of those?
Yeah, so we didn't sort of necessarily go out. We've always got a, you know, donate button on the bottom of our monthly newsletter. But one of the things that we have found particularly useful for raising funds to cover our cost is whenever we've held an event, whether it's online or in person, through Humanitix, which is how everybody registered for today, there's always an option to donate. And if you make it a free event, most people will always make a donation, whether it's $10 or $100. So that's always been good to provide a bit of income to cover the cost of the event, but also of our ongoing administration.
Absolutely. I'll also say a couple of things here. One is that Sue mentioned Nation Builder. So I just wanted to clarify for anyone who isn't familiar with that, that's a campaign platform that is quite an expensive platform. And a lot of big campaigns, you know, the MP campaigns use Nation Builder. There are lots of other databases that might be a little bit cheaper and more user-friendly as alternatives as well. But what I will say, Sue, I can see your mind ticking, that community independence, absolutely. I'm seeing all the real nuts and bolts questions coming in, which is fantastic, because community independence definitely want to run a session, a Voices session, where we can really get into those nuts and bolts and those really great pieces of practical advice. We can talk about governance, we can talk about systems, talk about fundraising, talk about, Delia's popped something else in the chat here that she recommends, you know, having a lawyer on the team, I think you said, and, you know, things like, and social media and all the sort of ins and outs of that. So I think that will definitely be another session. And when you do your feedback after this, we'll send out a survey. So when you do feedback after this convention, if that's something, you know, a session that you'd like CIP to run, that you'd like to attend, then please put that into your feedback as well, so that we know that there's a demand out there for that. There's a question here: did any of you have young children or children, and how do you find that balance? I've got two children, 3 dogs. Delia put her fingers up as well at home. I think a lot of us are balancing. Greg, do you want to chime in, or Sue?
Yeah, I've got a couple of secondary school age kids, one of whom actually ended up being our deputy chief scrutineer. So that was really good. But I mean, a lot of people who are involved in these groups are women. I'm lucky. My wife sort of helped a little bit, but she obviously ran the household as well. Some of you guys might not be so lucky.
Yes, I was working for the most part, running the household and have 3 kids. So yeah. But I have to say though, when it was really busy, COVID was a strange time, because it actually helped make things easier to run in some ways, because it was always easier to run something online than it is to run a live event. It also didn't help in that the company I was working for shut down, like as in completely. But that also meant that I moved to contracting, and I actually stopped working in the lead up to the election and worked on this more than full time, and until that was, you know, until past the election. So if it depends how it's so many things depend on the circumstances of your group. It depends on how many really active and capable and committed volunteers that you have in your core group. If you have a smaller group of really active people, then, you know, if you're all working full time, then you need to have probably a less ambitious agenda. if you are blessed with a wider group of people who you can really split up the activities so that each of them is only running one thing, then you can probably do that with full-time people or and have a broader agenda. So a bit like any not-for-profit, the same would apply. So you really have to try not to do too much for the number of people who have time to commit.
The resources.
And probably be very, one of the things that we did for, that's on the folder that I've just shared with the two new groups, it was really to break down the activities that we wanted to get done and to have a bit of a survey of anyone who wanted to volunteer, what their capability was in terms of their expertise, interest and time commitment. And you really shouldn't shy away from being very clinical about that, because, it will help them and it will help you in the future. Like, there's no point in people, being all enthusiastic and promising the world. And everyone on this panel will have experienced those people who are lovely and they really want great outcomes and they really want to be a part of it. But when you actually ask them to do something, they're too busy. So, you've got to have very hard conversations with some people who love what you do, but actually don't have the time to commit to it, just in case you end up telling the world you're going to do something and then it doesn't happen. And that's not a great.
That's good advice. It's good advice. And I would say the flip side of that is build it and they will come. Like you don't let that stop you from starting, because I think that, I think only by starting to, put it out there, have those conversations, do these people start to emerge along the way. Yeah. And similar to what Sue was saying about the fundraising that she did, don't be afraid to sort of put it out there. We're looking for someone with accounting skills. Does anyone know anyone with, some social media skills, and start using your networks and their networks and their networks, and these people will start to emerge over time for sure.
Can I just make one comment about budgets and fundraising? We using a phrase my grandparents would have used, we ran off the smell of an oily rag. Like, yes. we really, we didn't go out and do major fundraising at all. And it's amazing what you can do if you get the right people with the right skill set, and you don't have to pay for graphic design and you don't have to pay to put up a website. And, we didn't pay for any of those things other than absolutely unavoidable costs of the host, for the website or whatever. If it was something where you could do a good enough job with some enthusiastic amateurs who have mates.
Absolutely. Definitely. And I think that it's really good also to always recognize, even with the Indi model, when Indi started, it was a very different, before Kathy came, emerged as a candidate, it was a very different situation than when they had a candidate forum with Helen 6 years later. This has taken a long time for them to get to where they were. And that's what we're talking about today, the evolution. So don't be afraid to get started and start small, and also, don't let perfect be the enemy of good as well when it comes to graphic design or anything like that. I think, one of the best things about Voices groups is they are authentically grassroots. So don't feel that you have to look super polished, because I actually think that won't make sense to people out there. So thank you everybody for your time. Thank you to our wonderful panel. I am going to have to close up. I will give you the last 30 seconds each to just do our last little piece, which before we all get back into the lobby, which will give you an opportunity to get into Alana's session with the 3 case studies. So the final question was, and I've even forgotten what it was, would you like to share one thing our audience can do to get out there and get political? Sue.
Easy for me.
Oh, sorry.
Just read the Indi way.
Read the Indi way. Okay, that's a very good way to start. Sue?
Actually, you just have to start talking about it with everybody all of the time, and then all of a sudden momentum builds. Conversations.
Michael?
Yeah, connect with people and share the possibilities.
Fantastic. Delia?
Yeah, so I was going to recommend a number of books, which I'll actually put on the other chat, because this one will disappear in a second. There's a lot of literature out there that tells you exactly how to do this, and Voices of Us is one of them. So there's, take notes while you're reading that. Some of these are really great reads, but they're also a how-to guide. So get reading, definitely.
Marie?
Well, I think the upcoming referendum is just such a huge democratic opportunity. And I think each Voices group could look at what's best suited to their model and how they can get involved. But I think you can use that as a way to have conversations on such a huge and hugely important issue.
Fantastic. Please do. I encourage everybody to go out and do that. And we all of us are needed. It's about us. It's down to us to have those conversations to support the referendum. Every single person on this call can do something to help. Thank you again, everybody, for spending your lunch break with us. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. You know, your knowledge is incredible and we really appreciate you paying it forward in this way. I'll see all of you in the next session with Alana, and we will look forward to getting together again with another through the CIP for another Voices session very soon.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.